Hi everyone, my name is Madhukar and I'm part of the DevRev team. And it's with great pleasure as well as privilege for me to announce Abhay Parasnis, CTO of Adobe, who is here with us on the first ever live event of DevRev called the DevRev Day. Welcome to the event, Abhay.
Thanks, Madhukar. Great to be here. And first off, congrats to you and Dheeraj and rest of the DevRev team. It's a pretty important and big milestone for you guys. I mean, 1 year building new things is hard, and so excited to be here.
Thanks, Abhay. And again, we are looking forward to this entire journey. So let's start with your journey, Abhay. Adobe was, if we think about it, is the original PLG company in many different ways, especially with Reader as one of the Acrobat PDF journey. It is quite a quintessential PLG story by itself. Can you talk a little bit about, what was the strategy when, back in the day when you decided to go this direction, and eventually what led to the product-led era that we are currently in? Tell us a little bit more about the genesis, how you started in that direction.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I mean, I think a lot of your audience may know some of the portions of this story, but I'll try to keep it at a high level. I mean, as you look, Madhukar, at kind of the transformation that most people kind of refer to that Adobe went through in its business, I would say really there were three core shifts. There was obviously a kind of economic or a business model shift driven by a lot of the economic cycles. Again, back in 2008, coming out of the recession, there was a pretty clear understanding that the old model of perpetual software in terms of just economically how we used to engage with customers was very uneven and lots of cycles up and down. And so one change that probably gets a lot more attention in external narrative is the fundamental financial transformation to go from kind of the perpetual software that customers would buy once every few years to more of a subscription ongoing engagement. So that I would say is one. But I would tell you there are two other dimensions that may be more interesting and relevant for this audience. One was we were staring at a pace, kind of an overall environment around us where the technological change and the pace of change was accelerating so rapidly. I mean, we all know as consumers, we have experienced over the last decade plus, which is the pace with which new devices and smartphones and new web services and new communication platforms. And so first we were dealing with a interesting disconnect for our engineering and product organization where the rate at which things were changing both on the technology side on one aspect, and then more importantly the rate of change of our users and customers expectations of how quickly we have to be able to turn around and deliver a product that matches those technology changes. That change was getting quite aggressive and pace was increasing. And I'll give you an example. You mentioned Acrobat and Reader as an example. One of our previous models was we would batch up all the innovation and do these big bang releases every 2-3 years. Some of you may remember we used to do these giant suite releases like Microsoft Office used to do. We had a creative suite and we would batch up like 2 or 3 years worth of innovation, cram it all in, not talk to customers for 3 years because Wall Street driven, like every new release had to drive a substantial excitement and substantial kind of a revenue pop, if you will. And so the model was almost a very discrete model of go dark for 2-3 years, put everything you can put in a box. And by the way, literally in a CD and a box. And then hope that you hit the target relative to customer expectations. But what was happening was the technologies were changing and user expectations and behavior were changing so many times in those 3 years. And so the biggest driver of change for us was, can we remove that constraint and can we allow our engineering and product teams to engage real time, much more in every week, every month. And in fact, when features are available, test and iterate, don't worry about batching up like 200 features in one giant release, and maybe learn, by the way, not just about successes, but very quickly learn about the failures or features that customers don't care about, and actually move on. And so that probably is the core change, from this 3 year big bang, don't talk to customers, no early feedback, to a much more continuous, tighter loop and smaller bite-sized chunks of innovation delivered when ready, with a lot more experimentation.
No, you're absolutely right, Abhay. I remember back in the day when we used to do these waterfall strategies, and once a year we do a big release. And one of the things we are doing here at DevRev is to try and build out not just a PLG engine for ourselves, but how it would affect the overall developers. We are thinking very hard about that as well. So the first thing we did was, okay, what do we need to do so we can deploy new features and fixes even on the website as many times as we want, even within a day. Forget about a year, forget about a month, a week. How do we do that within a day if we wanted to? So one thing, obviously, as being the OGs in the PLG world, there's a lot of interaction design that's now involved, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about how the website is merging with the app and so on. But what were some of the initial lessons learned as you decided to go in this direction from both your personal journey as well as the company's journey?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And again, there are at multiple levels. Maybe first I'll start at the broader lessons learned, and then maybe when we get into a little bit of the design and technology and the actual engineering changes in our processes next, maybe. But at the highest level, I would say kind of maybe there were few that stand out. First of all, I will say, Madhukar,
Mhm.
kind of to you and your audience, a lot of times when we have these conversations, these stories and narratives sound much more linear and clean, and everything went really beautifully in lessons learned. Whereas in reality, as you know, and your audience knows, it's
Yeah.
anything but clean. It's very messy, it's very iterative. Even in the spirit of what we are talking about, these lessons learned are also extremely iterative and kind of experimental in nature. And a lot of what I'm saying in retrospect sounds much nicer and cleaner, but it wasn't actually like that when we were going through. Uh, that said,
You're absolutely right. Yeah, a lot of trial and error.
exactly. And so, but as we distill our lessons, I'll start with first communication across key constituencies is extremely, extremely crucial. And I know that may sound like a cliche, obvious statement to a lot, but I think bridging three core stakeholders and audiences, at least in our case, there's customers. You really have to make sure
Mhm.
customers understand the model you are changing. And by the way, by that I don't mean just the financial model of how they engage and pay you now. Earlier was software license versus now monthly subscription. But in terms of customers have a different engagement model with you when you go through this PLG and kind of a new way of interacting where they can engage early, they can engage frequently. You expect them to give a lot more feedback, both good and bad. So customer as a stakeholder, obviously in our case as a public company shareholder, and making sure they understand what we were going to do. But then finally, I think probably the one I would say in retrospect ended up being the most crucial is your employee base and how they adapt to that change. Was probably, I would say, communication to that audience. And not every will go on that journey with the same level of embrace of this change. I mean, that's probably the biggest lesson learned. There'll be change agents throughout the org who will embrace it very rapidly. There'll be neutral folks who will go along if it starts looking like the kind of the flywheel is working. And then there are entrenched folks who will just not see the benefits and will continue to want to do things the old way. And so, one, I think it's important to really embrace the change. In our case, part of it was kind of burn the boats mentality, if you will, which is once you commit to this model, you really have to go all in. And I would say that is one thing where you cannot be half-hearted about. There is the one aspect where you don't want to be in the experimentation mode, which is, well, maybe we'll try this new way of engaging with customers. Obviously, we are going to experiment and iterate, but at a strategy level, you got to really commit to that mindset. So that probably is the one change. The last thing I'll say on this, and then I'll let you kind of drive at the next level, is the operating model of how your teams work in most
Hmm.
companies is driven, I would say, either by what your financial structures are, how you book revenue, how you support customers, or what I call your org structure as it's reflected in your Active Directory or whatever your
Hmm.
and I think your engineers are supposed to interface with product managers only. Product managers can talk. So it's a very siloed, very linear model of operating. And I think the biggest change we had to do was completely blow that up and say it's a very different customer journey driven operating model and not a financial or Active Directory driven operative model.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Abhay. I think the customer driven part is also very key. And personally, I went from being in product management, and even before that, being a developer, to now on the growth side of things. One thing that does come back over and over again is, even when you're thinking from growth perspective now in the PLG world, it's about your customer, it's about your user, right? If you initially, it used to be, okay, we will do a demo and so on, and then the journey takes on its own life. Now it's about your customers are finding you, they're coming to your website, and then with your trials and other features, they're actually within the product within a few months, within a few minutes. So one of the question I had is, when you think about PLG, one of the key tenets, at least that's been our experience, is being user
Yeah.
focused, and not just user focused in a cliched way. It is more like in certain ways, you have to become a PM or product manager, and you have to think about the interaction design, and you don't necessarily think about, okay, how they're going to sign up, but you start to think about what is their experience within your website and within the app, within the freemium product, and go from there. What are some of your thoughts in terms of Adobe being so focused on elegant interaction design, and how you effectively use it to bring in and build out a community of users even before they become customers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And again, multi-layered, as we can, I'm sure, spend a lot of time on this. But to keep it maybe brief, first I would echo what you said. Design in
Mhm.
this world is a lot more than just beautiful pixels or polished UI and kind of a really snazzy website with nice content. I mean, those are all, they have a role, but especially in this shift, one of the fundamental things you have to really reorient. And by the way, as Adobe, as you know, we obviously, even before, we used to take a lot of pride in our business being design and creativity. And in a weird way, it was probably
Right.
harder for us because we always felt there are world class designers at the company. We were always kind of used to take pride in being world class at it. But the change we had to make, even within the talent base we had in design and engineering and product management and all functions, is fundamental shift is to be context driven of user journeys. And what I mean by that
Mhm.
is, it's not just design that is elegant and looks nice, but functionally, do we really live in the user's journey every single day? Number one. But for us, the big change, and I do see a lot of companies that DevRev kind of is going to serve and they struggle with, is if you have a change in your user persona. Like, I'll speak for ourselves. We used to serve
Mhm.
couple of decades back only high-end professional users, like the best photographers, movie editors. But with PLG and with this shift and with the subscription change, we started attracting a lot more diverse type of users, students and
Mhm.
hobbyists and people who were aspiring creatives but didn't really have that skill set. And so the thing we had to do was unlearn all the things we had learned serving the professional users and say this is a different kind
Mhm.
of user, and their user journeys and their needs, even if they did a Google search for Photoshop, to know that they really, their aspiration is to produce a Photoshop level of output, but they may never be able to use the complexity and tools of a product like Photoshop, and what's the best user journey for them. And one of the hardest things I'll tell you is, even if we realize that selling them Photoshop may be more profitable in the short run, but if we realize their user journey and their context is such that they may be better served by a more free, simple to use, web based workflow that we have, we should actually direct them to that, because if they retain and engage over the long term, then they are going to be more valuable customer. And even if short term revenue benefit may be one place, so that's a mindset shift, even in your product
Mhm.
organization. And then the last thing I'll say is onboarding and first mile. We talk at Adobe a lot around kind of the devil is in the defaults, which is the defaults that you present to the user on actually the first onboarding and experience can be hugely impactful than any other aspect of the design.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Abhay, especially in terms of defaults and onboarding. And these are some of the lessons and things that we have heard from other PLG leaders as well. As you know, Abhay, one of the things that we are doing is we are building out a solution for developers, right? And we feel, especially in a PLG led world, the life and the day-to-day work of a developer changes. Because if you think about it, as a developer today, I am either working on feature requests or I'm working on issues, tickets, and stuff. And now with the website now kind of merging into your app experience with PLG, developers are getting pulled more and more on the website front end side of the thing as well, into the interaction design, into the features, and so on over there as well. So, in your mind, when you think about PLG architecture in general, there's two different things come to mind. One is, do you feel that the website is kind of merging with the app in certain ways for a lot of companies? And two, where does that role of developer now comes in? Is the developer now just talking about here's what the product does, or it's now also thinking, or is the developer now also thinking, well, in my spectrum of users who are all the way from hobbyist all the way to expert, I need to actually think of both when I'm building out the entire experience. So, first question: do you think that the website is kind of merging with the app in the PLG world? And two, how do you see the developer's role change into that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Madhukar, and I'll share my kind of perspective. But I have to say, this is one of the reasons and one of the areas when Dheeraj originally shared with me kind of his vision and what you guys are trying to do with DevRev and trying to bring kind of the revenue and the customer aspects much closer to developers. I actually think it's an exciting new frontier. I mean, I'll share our journey along that spectrum, but so many companies and customers and market at large out there is going to go through this same change. And so this, I would be remiss if I didn't say this is one of the things that's exciting about what you guys are trying to do, kind of just in terms of enabling that. Two things. I'll say first, you're absolutely correct that, and by the way, it's not just website, but the role and definition, even before you say the role of developer, I would say the definition of product is radically changing. And in fact, it used to be, and by that, I don't mean you used to deliver a desktop software and now you have to deliver a website and you have to deliver a mobile app. Yeah, that's a technical change on the surfaces. But it used to be for most engineering and product teams, the definition of product was the core workflows that were in the box, if you will. Like, hey, these are the functional things you have to enable for users. To your point, what's fascinating now is I would argue things like website, and even before website, the journey that they start by when they type a query in Google search or any other search engine, the definition of product starts for a user well before they ever come to your website. They actually have an intent in their mind, and you have to start optimizing their journey even before they discover your website and come to your website. When they come to your website, are you really enabling them to find the content they want to find quickly, the tools that they want to either download and try with self-serve or purchase if they're ready to purchase? So you are absolutely correct. And one of the biggest, I would say, lessons learned for us, by the way, this one we did not learn early, just to be clear. Even when the business model transformation was successful and working well, it took us a while to realize that what our customers now consider our product is not just the 50 features in Acrobat or Photoshop, but it's actually how they navigate and discover things on our website. And is there the right analytics? Is there the right experimentation? I'll give you one example. Photoshop, iconic product, users love it, continues to be very vibrant. But one of the things we never realized until we made to a shift to this PLG and kind of a different way of engaging with customers who were not just professionals sitting in extremely high bandwidth network environments. And as students and other people started downloading, the simple thing like a download size of the binary to get the app on your machine and to even launch it was a major pain point for customers. And they may never even see the magic that Photoshop enables. And so then the team optimized the hell out of the website experience. We created a bootstrapping experience where the downloader will basically get a fraction in a download going and start engaging them with content and tutorials even while rest of the app was installed. And so, yeah, website is absolutely now not only part of the product, I would argue it's even more, it's the first mile, as I was saying earlier. And if you can't delight the user at that point, they may never get to the real product, if you will. And so we say website is really the first product that every customer is actually going to use.
Yeah, and even with our own experience about what we've seen, and in my personal experience in my journey from product management to marketing, what we've seen initially in the old world, it used to be there was a different team for the website, right? And that team just managed the content, and they managed about how they're going to generate
Yep.
SQLs and bring it into the sales team. And now we are seeing more and more developers to be part of that. So in fact, when we are thinking about our own PLG engine, we are thinking about, let's think about the architecture and the org structure from a dev point of view first, and then we'll figure out the sales part. So the other question I had for you, because again you're again one of those companies as well as individuals who have gone through this journey much ahead of anybody else, is as you grow as a company, eventually you also have to talk to enterprise customers, right? On one end of the spectrum, you're talking to the end users. You want it to be delightful, you want it to be easy, discoverable, and onboarding and all that. But the other end, you have your
Yeah.
enterprise customers, and for them, maybe you need a much more stronger handshake, so to speak, or a much more personal touch before they actually go and decide a purchase. Both from an organization perspective, as a mindset perspective, how does that play out in your mind and in your experience?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Madhukar, and I'll address that. Before I do, I know you did ask me earlier also the change in role, developer's role, and it relates to this question. That's why I do want to just take a brief minute and say, I mean, we talked about website and things. I'll say two things about the role of developers changing radically, and then the kind of the B2C individual versus large enterprise kind of flows from that. One, I think there's a shift to a lot more experimentation, feature flagging, test and iterate, and surfaces that you traditionally as a developer may not have had deep involvement in. I mean, it used to be in the traditional waterfall that website is really a marketing groups thing, and then support systems are customer support groups thing, and sales channels are sales channels thing. Increasingly, what we see is developers and product managers and designers, everyone has to be involved throughout the life cycle. Your website is as much a experimentation and commerce and feature flagging and analytic insight surface as the in product instrumentation. So first I would say that's a one change. I will say the other one is failure modes, if you can even call that, are as exciting learning points as success modes. And so you really have to condition your organization to say experiments that quote unquote fail and don't deliver the either the expected results, they are actually as exciting and as meaningful to your PLG journey, because it actually iterates and refines. So that I think is a cultural change you have to drive within your engineering organization. Last thing I'll say, data and instrumentation, experimentation is all good, but especially for developers, and I know that's a big chunk of your audience here, is data can't be answered to all your questions. As engineers and developers and product managers, the role of intuition and your ability to see around the corner is still very vibrant. I mean, I think that's one thing I will say at Adobe. We think we have done reasonably well, but we always worry that you don't want a data driven culture to take out all the intuition and instinct and kind of the creativity of the building the products. So that's equally important. B2C and B2B, it's a fascinating question, Madhukar. And one I'll acknowledge by saying we actually haven't fully nailed that. I think it's a journey we are on. I think market at large, but even Adobe on the B2C side, and by that I mean engaging individual consumers or individual users or small teams, we I think have done a pretty good job in terms of how we engage, how we let them discover products. But you correctly said, but when you go to the other end of the spectrum, I mean, just as a fun stat for your audience, today on adobe.com, which is our website, but it's much more than a website now, as we were talking, we sell
Yeah.
the lowest price point product we sell is 99 cents. Okay. So a user can just buy a one time, I want to convert PDF from Word. They can buy it one time, no subscription, no license, just one time, 99 cents, get it done, move on, done. So that's what you have to sell. Highly transient, low price point. To the same website has to also serve our B2B enterprise customers who buy 20, $50 million worth of large enterprise ELAs. And obviously they don't buy it on the website, as you said, but we have to serve that audience
Right.
also on that website. And so first,
Yeah.
it's a challenge. And I don't think anyone has really cracked that true end to end with businesses that have that much diversity. What we are trying to do is take the lessons learned from serving individual users. But actually, even companies
Mhm.
increasingly are saying they want to engage in those ways. They want the offerings and content to be personalized. Now, the final deal may be negotiated still with the human touch and the in person, but they want highly personalized. They want self service. So, one of the biggest changes for us, Madhukar, is
Mhm.
a lot of those enterprise products used to require, well, call us if you want us to show a demo of the product, and then we will take 3 months to load your data, and that's the classic ERP. I think even that end of the spectrum now says, if you can't give me a self-serve within 2 minutes, if I can't sign in and try out your product, you may never get to me for the negotiation stage. And so that is a change we are seeing.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah, and I think a lot of companies have kind of struggled or worked through that entire journey as well. You start off with your end users, and then you get to a point when you're now talking to the business buyers, and slightly different journey. But it's really refreshing to hear what you just said. It's like even those users are saying, "Don't give me 2 months for a POC. Show me how your product works right now, and I want to go try it out." So, switching gears a little bit, Abhay, because I have to confess, I was smiling when you were talking about hobbyists. I am one of those hobbyists that uses Adobe products, and I love Lightroom. And one of the things that I love about Lightroom is that I can take a picture, and when I hit that auto button, it uses AI to really enhance the picture. And maybe this is one of the secret a lot of photographers don't want to talk about. But personally, for me as a hobbyist, I think it's beautiful. So I wanted to get your take on one AI. How is that changing the overall development landscape in general? But more importantly, when you think of AI, and especially as your role, Bhay, I know you're using AI across Adobe products. So I wanted to get your take on how do you think it affects PLG, both in terms of getting insights about your users that are on the website and in your PLG journal, but also within enhancing the overall experience. Thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, that's a topic, as you can imagine, is near and dear to my heart. But first of all, thanks for being a kind of Lightroom user and customer. That's also big. I have a huge personal passion for Lightroom. I mean, I obviously love a lot of our products, but that one in particular is special. And I'll use a couple of examples in Lightroom to illustrate what you're asking. I do think AI, I mean, it's a broad topic. And I know you're going to have Vinod talking about it probably way more eloquently than I can. But at the highest level for us, we look at kind of AI transformation in context of the PLG broader narrative in kind of three buckets, if you will. One,
Mhm.
in the core product workflows, as I was saying earlier, as our user base has kind of evolved from just the hardcore professional user base. One of the things, Madhukar, people like you, I think, who use Lightroom have told us year after year is they love Adobe products, but the learning curve and to just even discover all the things takes such a long time. And some people actually have patience for it because it's a passion for them. But then there are some people like my wife. She wants to get a result where she's trying to modify some image for some Instagram post, and she's not going to spend 30 minutes trying to learn all the knobs in Lightroom and stuff. And so one of the first areas where we think AI has a dramatic potential is in
Mhm.
simplifying the learning curve, and that ties to the PLG kind of a discussion around defaults and first mile, which is the more we can use AI and machine learning models to understand the context of the user and user journey. And this is more than just personalization based on data. This is actually in real time. So I'll give you an example. One of the things we have now started, and this is already public, so your kind of audience can start trying these, both in Lightroom and Photoshop. If you are doing something on the canvas, and by that, like editing a picture, one of the things the AI, our Sensei system, will start doing while preserving all the privacy, we never upload kind of users' personal pictures and stuff. But hey, maybe you are trying to do some feature in layers or masking a background. On the right hand panel,
Mhm.
we will automatically start pulling relevant YouTube tutorials or tutorials from some of the best photographers who have used that feature. And so, in context, start helping you around like, hey, maybe if you're trying to do this, is this really now? Obviously, as Madhukar, you and your audience will remember, there's a fine line in trying to help the user versus becoming a nagging kind of the clippy analogy that we all, I'm sure, remember, which is, but AI can
Yeah.
actually be very impactful in changing the learning curve and making you more productive. That's number one. But the other fascinating thing for PLG is deep instrumentation, which is AI actually can help you with understanding your users' journeys in the product. What are they getting stuck on? Where are the friction points you experience? And one of the things for us that Sensei has been exceptionally valuable, not what most end users see, but really under the surface, is telling us, for example, in Lightroom, one of the things we have now built under the covers is like a creative graph, which starts telling what are the search queries people actually often use. And when they use those queries, what is typically the end result they are looking for. And as we are over time building an AI model, it lets us dramatically compress that the learning curve slash the journey through the product, if you will. And so that's actually probably the biggest change with AI, that I think PLG will become a lot more instrumentation driven, insight driven personalization, and the in context learning will become a lot easier.
That's phenomenal. That's a beautiful insight, Abhay. So staying on that topic, there are a couple of other things I wanted your thoughts on. So, for example, when you talk about user context when they are in the product itself or when they're initial part of the journey, how important is it to have them a human touch as well? Or when do you decide that somebody who's trying your product, whether on the website or in your trial, they kind of need a human touch? And obviously with AI, this becomes a little bit more relatively easier. That's why I use double quotes. But what are some of your experience in terms of people who are coming in by
Yeah.
their own and people who maybe want to talk to somebody, but they all want to do it in sort of a zero touch way? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I mean, it's really exciting to see you kind of zero in on a lot of the areas that are very relevant for us. I'll give you two examples, and it's a good juxtaposition. Even as you do AI and as you do a lot more features and make lots of things powerful and magical and enhance using technology, one of the things we certainly in our business, and I'll use Creative Cloud and Lightroom, Photoshop again as examples, we believe
Mhm.
that AI is not going to actually replace the human touch and human creativity, especially in creative tools. There is always going to be that ultimate narrative around only what a human can enable or do. And so we first of all look at the role of AI as simplifying that learning and then amplifying, letting you do things that used to take hours, if you can now do in minutes. It frees you up to be more actually focused on the creative endeavors, like the story you're trying to tell or the amazing picture you're trying to actually publish to the world. So that first, that's worth saying. But I think I'll give you two examples, Madhukar, where even as we enhance the AI features, our customers, and this is only possible with PLG, they are telling us that they want better AI features, but they also want in product better human touch. So I'll give you two features. We have a feature called Adobe Live, and what it is, if your audience has gamers, you're familiar with Twitch. I have a 15-year-old son who spends inordinate amount of time just watching other gamers, and I'm sure you can relate to that, Madhukar, maybe with your kids or friends. Um, but so one of the things we experimented with PLG, where users were telling us, "Hey, if I'm creating something in one of your tools, it would be awesome if somebody, one of the best artists on the planet who uses your tools, is able to actually broadcast in live as they're creating something, so we can watch them through their creative process, and through that very human element we can learn not just what the tool enables but what that human's process is." When we launched it, we had mild expectations. It's blown through the roof, the engagement, and average users now watch more than 60 minutes per session of a
Wow.
artist actually creating something using our tools. And so they never actually, it's not about the AI features we built, but it's actually the creative process of that user going through that our customers are voting with their feet, if you will, or I guess with their eyeballs, engagement. So that's one. And then the second one, which again surprised us, it's actually for you, Madhukar, as a Lightroom user. One of the things we were hearing from customers is, hey, we see amazing photographs from professional photographers we aspire and want to learn from. Can you start bringing their content into Lightroom and let me learn from how they go through the editing process? And so we have enabled a feature now where community can start seeing some of the most award-winning photographers, their process of going through edits. And by the way, it's the subtle human touch. It's not what the product enables, but it's what the user did. And that's so the long way of saying, Madhukar, the human touch. And I know you maybe were asking customer support or handholding, but we do think the role of community and human engagement in that PLG is only going to increase. That's at least what we are seeing in our business.
No, this is perfect. So thank you again, Abhay. We really appreciate you joining us in our first ever live event and talking about something that's not only near and dear to our what we are doing, but also to our audience as well. And before I let you go, one last question for developers, for makers who are now setting out in this amazing time where you have so many different tools, AI and whatnot, to go build out their own business, to go build out their own PLG journey. And I know you and I talked about it that it's not a linear thing, but kind of a zigzag. You kind of experiment and then you learn. But if there's one or maybe three things that you would want them to know before they set out on their journey as they build out their business on a PLG, what would those be?
No, that's a great question, and I guess as I reflect on kind of our own journey and its ongoing journey, so we expect to learn from Madhukar, folks like DevRev and your audience. I'm sure there's a lot to learn here, but I'll say first that deep culture, any kind of a beginner's mind of constant experimentation and learning, and being open to be both delighted in positive ways but occasionally also disappointed in convictions you held don't actually materialize, but using both those modes actually as a core point of your product evolution journey. And I think the role of developers in particular being not just restricted to building features based on a certain linear conviction of what a product or market is, but really treating it as a kind of a constantly living, breathing kind of a organism, if you will, that's constantly adapting. And as you touch and interact with your customers through all these touch points, letting software become this much more organic, almost I mean, again, we are a creative company, so we think of a lot of things like artists. And so as you think about software building and product led growth, thinking of that like how an artist with a canvas in front of that and with a oil paint and a brush, they start with a certain view, but as you are actually, as the paint is interacting with canvas, you have to use the feedback and the real-time nature to let the art evolve. And I think that to me is probably the single biggest journey. As the engineers, we all have analytical minds with precision, but letting your customers guide with creativity and fluidity kind of your journey, and learning from that is probably one. And number two, I think having some fun while you're doing it, because honestly, as you kind of go on that journey, that closed loop interaction makes the creative process a lot more fun rather than you doing something in a black box and then hoping whether it works or not. The process of creation itself, enjoy that as you go on that journey, kind of would be my two things for your audience.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Abhay. And again, thank you so much for being part of this journey. We're looking forward to doing more.
Great. Thanks for having me, and all the best for DevRev team as you begin your exciting journey in the years ahead. Thanks.